Hello, my name is Ilkka Kangasniemi. I'm the CEO of BBS Bioactive Bone Substitutes. The company is listed in the North First Nasdaq since 2018 and is currently in a process of applying its first CE marking in Europe. There is a clear clinical need for the product that we have been developing for the past years. If you imagine that you cut off a segment of your bone, say from your arm, extending 2 centimeters or more, the bone tissue cannot heal itself naturally across that defect. This is why surgeons need to have substances that help the tissue to grow across that gap. There are over 2 million cases annually in the world of such kind of bone healing defects caused by very many different reasons. Now, there are basically currently 3 types of solutions to address this problem. The golden standard is the patient's own bone, which is being harvested from elsewhere in the body via second operation to gain enough material to fill the defect to be supported. The second type, which is actually even more effective in producing bone than the patient's own bone, is so-called synthetic growth factors. These are substances that are a single growth factor chosen out of over 16 different types of naturally occurring growth factors in the body. The problem, however, with these is that they are even too effective and may cause overgrowth complications. They are also highly priced. The third type of products, well, there are quite many different types of products in that group. But what's common to all of them is that their efficacy just doesn't match that of the patient's own bone. And that's why they cannot be used in all kinds of defects currently being treated. On the right-hand side, you can see an image. It's a real image of a patient case where surgeon has created a wound and opened the tissues all the way to the bone surface and is aiming to collect the transferable bone, which is in this case around 5 centimeters across. And this gives you an idea that what kind of a process the harvesting operation is. Secondly, any surgical operation in the body will create a risk of complication on its own. It may be infected, it might not heal, and so on. So, why is Artebone, our first product, so competitive in this field of different kind of materials? It is because it contains the 2 main ingredients that the patient's own bone also has. It has growth factors that are naturally occurring in the bone in all the scale available in the natural bone. But it also has the mineral part, the synthetic tricalcium phosphate ceramic, which provides the scaffold for cell growth during the healing process. And now, why exactly is this combination so good compared to the other synthetic and non-natural bone substitutes? It's because it combines not just the efficacy of the own bone transplant, but it also is safe to use, and because of its production method, it's cost effective. We get the bone proteins from reindeer. Why reindeer? It's because we believe reindeer has an extraordinary capacity to grow new bone due to the reason that it has to grow its own horns yearly again and again. And how does it do that? It gets the minerals for the horns from the rest of the skeleton, because it cannot consume enough calcium and phosphate from the food during its growing its antlers. In fact, it is said that the reindeer antlers are the fastest growing tissue in the world when they emerge. We have carried out one clinical study, and we are happy to say that we were able to prove with this 34-patient study that the Artebone bone healing capacity was comparable to that of the patient's own bone, which is number one. But it was also safe. It didn't show any complications in that clinical study that would not have occurred anyway caused by the operation itself or by the very safe ceramic products available in the market. So if you compare Artebone to all the other commercially available products in terms of its ability to provide osteoinductive and osteoconductive properties, it compares very close to the patient's own bone, or called autograft in this slide. While the synthetic ceramics or the cadaver collected demineralized bone matrices or allografts lack osteoinductive component, and while the synthetic growth factors lack the osteoconductive component. And this is why clinically Artebone is superior to these commercially available products. It is a fact that about 1/3 of all bone defect operations that require bone substitutes are still operated using the patient's own bone. A second third are being operated using the bone materials acquired from the deceased people. And the rest, 1/3, is divided between the synthetic ceramics and growth factor products. And if you look at these two images now at the same time, it may become obvious that this is the reason why Artebone has the capacity not only to capture the markets from the synthetics and the synthetic growth factors, but also the market potential in autograft replacement and demineralized bone matrix replacement. Where are we going now? The lead product, so-called Artebone paste, is under CE marking process, and we see that we can expand the market potential greatly. Firstly, by creating new types of formulations or product forms that the surgeons require, because it's not possible to treat all kinds of or all forms of defects with the paste form product. So for some indications you may need a more solid block form. For another type of indication you might need what we call Artebone gel, which is physically very different and in their clinical use very different, but they still clinically provide the same healing capacity. We also see that a part of the market potential for BBS is in finding partnerships. In other words, existing implant producers who may need the additional healing power of the protein extract. The first Artebone paste product has been directed to orthopedic indications. The current market in that area is around $2.9 billion. But this is not the entire market. This does not include spine applications, but it has not been included in this figure because it requires product development of its own. But we see that we still have sizable, actually about equally great market share to be conquered in the spine sector. The growth drivers, the obvious one, aging population, but also the changing clinical trends. Artebone specific drivers are what we have been discussing already, that the three main arguments, the efficacy, the safety, and the cost effectiveness are the really a driving force. We estimate that we can reach about 5 to 10% of the market within 5 years, which would result in well over $100 million turnover. One important aspect is the cost of the product. Autograft in itself doesn't cost you anything because it's your own bone, but the time in the operation theater costs between 5 to 10,000 euros an hour. And if you have to use a minimum of half an hour to collect the autograft, then you can start understanding why also the autograft is not free. The synthetic growth factors have been priced between 3,500 to 5,500 per patient, being the most effective material available. And then the rest, the less effective materials, are priced well below 1,500 euros. We believe that BBS Artebone can be priced on average somewhere around 2,000 euros because of its improved properties. Thus, it is very cost-effective way of treating the patients. The business model is based on the same arguments that derive from these three factors: efficacy, safety, and cost effectiveness. It's just said in a different terms or perspective from the hospital's standpoint or from the patient's standpoint. But all in all, we see that the Artebone is a natural choice for the surgeon. Today, our organization is still in the R&D phase, and it needs to move now to production and marketing and sales phase as soon as we receive the CE marking. We also need to start creating more clinical data for the support of the marketing, but also for showing scientifically that the product really works. Simultaneously, as we start direct sales after CE marking, we also need to start looking for partnerships for development of new product forms. And this is probably the question that our current owners most like to address. Where are we with the CE marking application at the moment? I have noticed in the internet discussions that it's not so clear always to the audience that what is happening in the CE marking process. In fact, there are 2, if not 3 parallel evaluations ongoing on the route to the CE marking approval. There is the approval process for the quality system, which is absolutely necessary to get the CE marking, but simultaneously there is the product classification review, which is part of the product approval process. And in addition, since the product includes also a drug component, also the competent authority responsible for the drug evaluations needs to be consulted alongside. Finally, as soon as we reach the CE marking, we will start own marketing, looking for the partnerships, and then creating activities that support all marketing efforts, such as Key Opinion Leader program. Running out of time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ilkka. We had several questions from our forum for BBS, so I will translate some of those. You submitted the CE application in March this year, and this summer you mentioned in a presentation that you are expecting it to take 8 to 12 months, and now it's 8 or 9 months since the application. So has your view on that changed, or are you still expecting it in about 1 year, or what does it look like to you?
Yeah, actually that was the not our estimate of the timeline, that was the notified body's estimate of the timeline. And so far there hasn't emerged any such issues in the process we have gone through so far with the notified body that would cause us to think differently. However, we are aware of the MedTech Europe report stating that there are none of the CE marking processes that would have reached the CE marking approval within a year. But that was published in July. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It may have changed after that.
But as long as the notified body is not telling us otherwise, we have to live with that knowledge.
Sure. Then when you get the CE labeling, you're planning to go to commercialization phase. So what steps have you taken so far, and what does it practically mean when you start to commercialize? What will you do, and what is the timeline?
Yeah, the steps taken are dependent on the funding of the company, and unfortunately, as we ran the last share issue last summer, the financial market was already in somewhat of a turmoil, and well, don't know exactly why, but we could only reach 77% of the share issue, leaving us in a position that we cannot fully start implementing the marketing efforts as early as we would have liked to. So in other words, we need to concentrate our resources to this CE marking process and make sure we will pass that. And as soon as that becomes clear, we believe we can run another share issue for the purposes of the marketing and sales. But in practical terms, given that we would have the resources, we would immediately start building an organization for marketing. We would start contacting key opinion leaders and start collecting clinical data for further support for marketing and clinicians.
At this point, your main markets would be the Nordic countries and selected European countries. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes. So a question from the forum is that how well known your product is during the potential users, or have you been able to get your message across to that crowd, or is it something that will come much stronger after the CE labeling?
Yeah. That would come later, because basically it requires those clinical studies to be able to convince the good doctors. Such doctors that do research themselves are probably aware of this development as well. But let's say the clinicians would not be until they see actual clinical data.
And you mentioned your funding requirements, so how long will your current funding last for now, or do you have a plan on when to organize the share issue?
Yes, but that's I'm not able to release that. We are working on it. And last interim report, we prognosed that the current funding would last about around March, April this year, next year. However, just a week ago we had this option share issue from which we gathered another 200,000 euros, which helps a little again. But we'll release that, how we solve the funding issue as soon as we can.
Yes, and final question, also maybe difficult to answer, but you mentioned possible partnering discussions. So is there anything you can tell about us on those topics?
Yeah, well, we know there's a great interest among the companies out there. And we know that from the fact that we had such discussions previously until the COVID pandemic started, and that killed them temporarily because the effect was that all those companies that started losing turnover significantly, I mean 20%, then their reaction was to stop all evaluations as the first thing. And but nevertheless, from that past, we know that there are definitely parties that are really interested.
Okay, thank you very much, Ilkka. And we have one more presentation for you, so let's welcome Bioretec.